The gavel came down like a thunderclap, and Judge Harrison's voice cut through the courtroom with surgical precision. "Mr. Peterson, your lack of preparation is not only unprofessional, it's insulting to this court and everyone present today." I felt my face burn as 200 eyes turned toward me. The mahogany-paneled courtroom suddenly felt like a coliseum, and I was the gladiator about to be devoured. My client, Mrs. Chen, shifted uncomfortably in her chair beside me, her weathered hands clutching a tissue as she watched her divorce settlement slip away with each word from the judge's mouth. "Your Honor, if I may," I started, my voice catching slightly. "You may not." Judge Harrison leaned forward, his steel-gray eyes boring into mine. "In 30 years on this bench, I have rarely seen such sloppy legal work. Your motion is denied, and I'm sanctioning you $5,000 for wasting this court's time." The courtroom erupted in whispers. Opposing counsel, David Blackwood, polished, expensive suit, smug smile, didn't even try to hide his satisfaction. He'd been gunning for me ever since I'd left his prestigious firm 3 years ago to start my own practice, taking several clients with me. "Furthermore," Judge Harrison continued, his voice dripping with disdain, "I'm ordering you to complete 20 hours of continuing legal education before you're permitted to appear in my courtroom again. Perhaps you'll learn something about the law you claim to practice." My hands trembled as I gathered my papers, many of which scattered to the floor in my haste. The sound of shuffling documents seemed deafening in the suddenly quiet courtroom. Mrs. Chen looked at me with such disappointment that I wanted to disappear entirely. As I bent to collect my scattered brief, I caught sight of something that made my blood run cold. There, partially hidden under Judge Harrison's desk, was a manila envelope with Blackwood's law firm letterhead. But what really caught my attention was the handwritten note visible through the transparent window. "Harrison, as discussed. The Peterson matter." I straightened slowly, my mind racing. Something wasn't right here. In all my years practicing law, I'd never seen Judge Harrison so personally vindictive toward any attorney. His attacks felt orchestrated, almost rehearsed. "Court is adjourned," Judge Harrison announced, rising from his bench with theatrical authority. "Mr. Peterson, I trust you'll use this humiliation as a learning experience." The word humiliation hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't just about legal procedure, this was personal. And as I watched Judge Harrison gather his papers, carefully sliding that manila envelope into his briefcase when he thought no one was looking, I realized I was about to discover just how personal it really was. But what I didn't know yet was that this moment of public shame would become the catalyst for the most important legal battle of my career, and it wouldn't be fought in front of a jury. The weeks following my courtroom humiliation felt like walking through quicksand. Word traveled fast in our small legal community, and Judge Harrison had made sure my professional reputation took a beating that would last months, maybe years. My phone, which used to ring constantly with potential clients, had gone nearly silent. The few calls I did receive were from existing clients wanting to know if they should find new representation. Mrs. Chen had already fired me, taking her case to Blackwood's firm, exactly where Judge Harrison's ruling had pushed her. "Tom, you need to see this," my paralegal Sarah said, bursting into my office with a stack of papers. Her usually composed demeanor was shaken, and I could see genuine concern in her eyes. She spread 3 case files across my desk, all recent decisions from Judge Harrison's courtroom. "I've been doing some research since that disaster 2 weeks ago. Look at these patterns." I leaned forward, studying the documents. The first case. Harrison had ruled against attorney Michael Roberts in a personal injury suit, citing inadequate preparation. Roberts had been forced to pay sanctions and was publicly dressed down in open court. The second case. Harrison had sanctioned attorney Lisa Hoffman for frivolous motions in a contract dispute, despite her motion being completely standard. The third case, Harrison had denied attorney James Morrison's perfectly valid objection and then lectured him about basic courtroom procedure in front of his client, Sarah, these are all solo practitioners, I said, the pattern becoming clear. Small firm attorneys who used to work for major firms. Exactly. And look at who represented the opposing parties in each case. She pointed to the attorney signatures. My stomach dropped. Blackwood, Stevens and Associates appeared on every single opposing counsel line. There's more, Sarah continued, pulling out her laptop. I ran a statistical analysis of Judge Harrison's rulings over the past 2 years. When Blackwood's firm appears before him, they win 94% of their cases. The state average for that type of success rate is around 60%. I stared at the screen, my legal mind processing the implications. That's not just unusual. That's statistically impossible unless the fix is in, Sarah finished. That evening, I sat in my car outside the Riverside Country Club, watching Judge Harrison emerge from what was clearly a business dinner. He wasn't alone. David Blackwood walked beside him, both men laughing as they headed toward the valet stand. They moved with the easy familiarity of old friends or co-conspirators. I pulled out my phone and started recording as they shook hands near Blackwood's Mercedes. I couldn't hear their conversation, but their body language spoke volumes. This wasn't a chance encounter. This was two men concluding what looked very much like a business arrangement. As I drove home that night, my mind raced with possibilities. If Harrison and Blackwood had some kind of understanding, whether financial or otherwise, it would explain everything. The impossible win rate, the personal attacks on small firm attorneys, the manila envelope I'd seen in court. But knowing something and proving it were entirely different matters. Judge Harrison was a powerful man with a spotless 30-year reputation. David Blackwood controlled one of the most influential law firms in the state. Going up against both of them with nothing but suspicions and circumstantial evidence would be career suicide. Then again, my career was already hanging by a thread. The next morning, I made a decision that would either vindicate me completely or destroy what little professional standing I had left. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I'd hoped never to use. FBI Public Corruption Unit, Agent Martinez speaking. Agent Martinez, my name is Tom Peterson. I'm an attorney, and I believe I have evidence of judicial corruption that you're going to want to see. 3 months of investigation had led to this moment. Agent Martinez sat across from me in an unmarked van parked 2 blocks from the courthouse, adjusting the wire concealed under my shirt for what felt like the 100th time. Remember, Tom, we need him to be explicit, she said, her voice steady but intense. Implications won't hold up in court. We need clear acknowledgement of the arrangement. My hands were shaking as I reviewed the fabricated case file one final time. The fictional client, the manufactured legal issue, the carefully crafted weak points that would make Judge Harrison believe he could humiliate me again. It all had to be perfect. What if he doesn't take the bait? I asked, adjusting my tie nervously. He will, Agent Martinez replied with confidence. Our investigation shows Harrison's ego is his weakness. He can't resist the opportunity to publicly destroy an attorney he perceives as a threat, especially one he thinks he's already broken. The past 3 months had been a masterclass in federal investigation. The FBI had uncovered a web of corruption that went far deeper than I'd imagined. Harrison hadn't just been ruling in favor of Blackwood's firm. He'd been receiving quarterly payments of $50,000 deposited into an offshore account. In exchange, he guaranteed favorable rulings and, when possible, the public humiliation of opposing counsel to drive business toward Blackwood's firm. 12 other small firm attorneys had been victims of this scheme. Some had left law entirely. Others had been forced to join larger firms just to survive professionally. The system was designed to eliminate competition and consolidate legal power in the hands of a few connected firms. "It's time," Agent Martinez said, checking her watch. "Court starts in 10 minutes. I walked into that courtroom, feeling like a completely different person than the humiliated attorney who'd fled 3 months earlier. This time, I had purpose. This time, I had backup. Judge Harrison entered with his usual theatrical flair, black robes flowing behind him as he took his place on the bench. His eyes found mine immediately, and I saw something I'd never noticed before. Anticipation. He was actually looking forward to destroying me again. "Mr. Peterson," he said, his voice carrying that familiar tone of condescension. "I see you've completed your continuing education requirements. I do hope you've learned something about practicing law in my courtroom." "Yes, Your Honor. I've learned quite a lot, actually." The case I presented was deliberately flawed. Motion papers with obvious procedural errors, citations to overturned cases, arguments that any first-year law student could dismantle. I played my part perfectly, the incompetent attorney who'd learned nothing from his previous humiliation. Harrison took the bait completely. "Mr. Peterson, this is even worse than your last appearance in my courtroom," he began, his voice rising with theatrical indignation. "Your motion is not just denied, it's an insult to the legal profession." Then came the moment we'd been waiting for. "Perhaps if you'd remained at a respectable firm like Blackwood, Stevens and Associates, you might have learned something about proper legal procedure. Mr. Blackwood knows how to practice in my courtroom." David Blackwood, seated at the opposing counsel table, shifted uncomfortably. That wasn't planned. Harrison had just made the connection explicit on the record. But Harrison wasn't done. His ego, inflated by months of unchallenged corruption, pushed him further. "In fact, Mr. Peterson, I'm going to do something unusual. I'm sanctioning you another $10,000, and I'm recommending to the state bar that your license be suspended. Attorneys like you don't deserve to practice in my jurisdiction." The courtroom was dead silent. Even the court reporter looked shocked at the severity of the ruling. That's when I stood up and delivered the line Agent Martinez and I had rehearsed. "Your Honor, before you finalize that ruling, there's something the court should know." Harrison's eyes narrowed. "Mr. Peterson, you're already in enough trouble. I suggest you listen carefully, Your Honor, because what I'm about to say is going to change everything." I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a thick manila folder, identical to the one I'd seen Harrison hide months earlier. "Ladies and gentlemen of the court, my name is Tom Peterson, and for the past 3 months I've been working undercover with the FBI to expose a corruption scheme involving this very courtroom." The explosion of sound that followed was unlike anything I'd ever experienced in a court of law. Judge Harrison's face went from confident authority to pale shock in the span of 3 seconds. The gavel fell from his hand, clattering onto his desk as he stared at me with the expression of a man watching his entire world collapse. "Mr. Peterson, what exactly are you suggesting?" His voice cracked slightly, the first sign that his composure was fracturing. "I'm not suggesting anything, Your Honor. I'm stating facts." I opened the manila folder and began reading from Agent Martinez's carefully prepared script. "On November 15th, you received $50,000 from an account controlled by David Blackwood. On December 12th, another $50,000. On January 18th, another $50,000. Blackwood shot to his feet. "Your Honor, this is completely inappropriate. Mr. Peterson is clearly having some kind of breakdown." "Sit down, Mr. Blackwood," I said, my voice carrying an authority I'd never felt before. "Unless you'd like me to read the transcript of your conversation with Judge Harrison at the Riverside Country Club on March 8th. The one where you discussed keeping the Peterson problem under control." The courtroom erupted in whispers and gasps. I could see court reporters frantically taking notes, and several spectators had their phones out, undoubtedly recording every word. Judge Harrison's face had gone from pale to gray. "Mr. Peterson, I'm holding you in contempt of court." "Bailiff, actually, Your Honor, I don't think you'll be holding anyone in contempt today." I turned toward the back of the courtroom as the doors opened. Agent Martinez entered, flanked by 2 other FBI agents, their badges clearly visible. Behind them came Assistant U.S. Attorney Rebecca Chen, Mrs. Chen's daughter, as it turned out, who'd been investigating judicial corruption for the past 5 years. "Judge Harrison," Agent Martinez called out, her voice carrying through the stunned courtroom. By the authority of the United States Federal Bureau of Investigation, you're under arrest for conspiracy, bribery, and violation of civil rights under color of law. The chaos that followed was something I'll never forget. Harrison tried to maintain his judicial authority even as handcuffs were placed on his wrists. "This is a mistake. You can't arrest a sitting judge in his own courtroom." "Actually, we can," AUSA Chen replied coolly, "especially when that judge has been systematically corrupting the judicial process for personal gain." David Blackwood had gone completely white and was frantically whispering to his associate, probably calling his own criminal defense attorney. He knew his turn was coming. As Harrison was led from the courtroom in handcuffs, he looked back at me with pure hatred. "You have no idea what you've done, Peterson. Do you think this ends with me?" "No," I replied, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I think it's just the beginning." Agent Martinez approached the bench and addressed the stunned courtroom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this proceeding is concluded. All cases that have been before Judge Harrison in the past 2 years will be reviewed by a special judicial panel for potential corruption. Anyone who believes they were a victim of judicial misconduct should contact the FBI field office immediately." As the courtroom slowly emptied, I stood there for a moment, absorbing what had just happened. 3 months ago, I'd been publicly humiliated and professionally destroyed in this very room. Today, I'd helped expose one of the most significant judicial corruption schemes in state history. Sarah appeared at my side, tears in her eyes. "Tom, that was incredible. But what happens now?" I looked around the empty courtroom at the bench where Harrison had wielded corrupt power for so long and smiled for the first time in months. Now we get back to practicing law the right way. 6 months later, I sat in my newly expanded office, reviewing case files with 3 new attorneys I'd recently hired. The phone that had gone silent after my public humiliation now rang constantly with new clients, many of them referrals from other attorneys who'd heard about the Harrison case. The final tally of the corruption investigation had been staggering. Judge Harrison received a 15-year federal prison sentence. David Blackwood got 12 years and was permanently disbarred. The scheme had affected over 40 cases spanning 3 years, with damages totaling more than $2 million. But the most satisfying moment hadn't been watching Harrison led away in handcuffs. It had come 2 weeks later, when Mrs. Chen walked into my office with tears in her eyes. "Mr. Peterson," she'd said, her voice shaking with emotion, "I owe you an apology. I thought you were incompetent, but you were the only one brave enough to stand up to them." Her divorce case was one of the 40 that were reviewed and overturned. She eventually received the fair settlement she deserved all along, plus additional damages for the emotional distress caused by the corrupted proceedings. The story had made national news. "Small-town attorney exposes judicial corruption ring" appeared in newspapers across the country. Legal journals wrote about the case as a perfect example of how corruption thrives when good people remain silent. 3 weeks ago, I'd received a call that still made me smile every time I thought about it. "Mr. Peterson, this is Chief Judge Williams. I wanted to personally thank you for your courage in exposing the Harrison matter. The integrity of our judicial system depends on attorneys like you." Then came the part that had truly floored me. "The Judicial Nominating Committee would like to know if you'd be interested in being considered for appointment to fill Judge Harrison's seat." Me, a judge. The attorney who'd been publicly humiliated and sanctioned was being considered for the very position held by the man who'd tried to destroy me. I hadn't given them an answer yet. Part of me was tempted. The poetic justice was undeniable. But another part of me loved practicing law, fighting for clients who couldn't fight for themselves. Yesterday, I'd made my decision. "Thank you for the incredible honor," I'd told Chief Judge Williams, "but I think I can do more good as an attorney. There are too many David Blackwoods out there, and not enough people willing to stand up to them." As I finished reviewing my files for the day, Sarah knocked on my door. "Tom, there's someone here to see you. Says it's about a judge in the Northern District who's been making some unusual rulings." I looked up from my desk and smiled. Apparently, my work exposing judicial corruption was just getting started. The young attorney who entered my office looked exactly like I had 6 months ago, defeated, humiliated, and convinced his career was over. His hands shook as he described being publicly dressed down by Judge Morrison for incompetent legal work, while the opposing counsel from a major firm smirked at the counsel table. "Mr. Peterson," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "I think something's wrong, but I don't know how to prove it." I leaned back in my chair and studied his face. "Tell me everything, and I mean everything. Start from the beginning." As he began his story, I felt that familiar fire in my chest, the same feeling I'd had when I first called Agent Martinez. Justice wasn't just about winning cases or following procedure. Sometimes it was about having the courage to stand up when everyone else was sitting down. "Don't worry," I told him as he finished his account. "We're going to figure this out together. And if Judge Morrison is corrupt, we're going to expose him too." The young attorney's face lit up with something I recognized immediately. Hope. Because sometimes the system is broken, and sometimes the people in power abuse that power. But every once in a while, someone stands up and fights back, and when that happens, everything can change. So let me ask you this. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where you had to choose between staying silent and risking everything to do what's right? What would you have done in my position? If stories like this resonate with you, stories about standing up to corruption and fighting for justice, make sure to subscribe to the channel and let me know in the comments. I read every single one, and your experiences matter. Sometimes the most important battles are fought by ordinary people who refuse to stay quiet when they witness injustice.